I'm Phil Svitek, 360 Creative Coach, and by popular demand, I'm giving my tutorial on how to create an animation that is in the style of Rotoscope. So for quick context, if you're unfamiliar, there's movies that I absolutely love, like Waking Life, A Scanner Darkly, and Amazon's series called Undone that is animated. Now, it's not just animation like in the computer-generated or hand-drawn style. What it is, you film something live action and then you essentially paint over it. So it gives a real lifelike performance, and it's just very cool, and you can kind of extend it, right? So whatever's filmed in that moment, you can change up the background and really go into fantastical elements that animation allows, right? So that's the fun aspect of it. Now, it's a technique that I obviously love, but requires historically a team of animators to go in frame by frame. And if you know anything about film, it's a series of images, 24 per second. So you can only imagine what that is for even just like a 90-minute movie, let alone a 2-hour one, right? So it's a lot of painstaking work. So, for a long time, I've been trying to kind of figure out the poor man's way of doing that, and what I had found online was very comparable tutorials for Photoshop of, kind of creating this cartoon effect or an animation effect, right? And so I was like, okay, that's cool, but that's for Photoshop, which is, strictly images. And then I took a step back, and as I said, I was like, wait, a movie essentially is just a series of still images strung together. And in any editing program, you can export out these series of images called an image sequence, right? As a JPEG, as a TIFF, PNG, whatever you ultimately need. And so, in fact, a lot of VFX get exported that way. That way, if during a render of, a visual effects shot, and if it goes bad, you're not losing everything. You're just, losing from a certain point, right? That's the benefit of that. But anyway, the point being that I was like, okay, so let me utilize the power of Photoshop and essentially, do this technique and apply it to all the images, of a movie, and then put it all back together. Now, don't worry, it does not require manual labor of you doing this to each individual image. What we're going to do is we're going to automate the process so that it does it for every single one of these images, and you just kind of have to let the computer do its thing, but don't have to sit there manually doing it. But let's really kind of take a quick step back, right? So I've got my editing software here. You can ultimately use any editing software because they all export out image sequences and import in image sequences. I just use Premiere, and so for me, that's what we're going with today. And so I've preloaded 2 shots here, just a little over 3 seconds to demonstrate this for you, right? Now, something to note while you're shooting this, this footage that I'm using was not intended for this purpose. But 2 things you want to note. Number 1, you want to make sure you have good lighting. It does not work. This technique does not work well with low lighting because you're going to lose a lot of light as you apply these settings to it. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2. It's best if you shoot the original footage in as high frame rate as you can. The reason for this is animation. You want it to be sharp. With live action, you want the blur, right? So as we're kind of seeing in this, as they're moving and jumping around, there's a bit of a blur. With animation, you don't want that. You want animation to be sharp. And if you're going to add a blur, you want to control that blur, in post rather than having it baked in, sort of a thing. But anyway, it'll still work regardless for the purposes of this demonstration. And by the way, this technique, if you really want to see it in action, how I utilized it of taking something live action and going sort of the fantasy route with it, sci-fi route. I have the short film called Playtest, which is a proof of concept for this film that I was working on called In Search of Sunrise. I've linked to that down below, so you can check that out in its entirety. It's about 3 minutes long, and it'll give you an idea of what this is capable of. And I also do a whole Q&A about the process of making that if you really want to kind of deep dive the full ins and outs of just the filmmaking process of that movie. But anyway, so we got this, as I said, just barely over 3 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and export it. And what we're going to do is we're going to export it into a folder that I call TIFF sequences. And I'm just going to make a new folder for this called Test01. You know, organize it however you want, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to click Save. Now here, as a format, I've selected TIFF. Okay, so that's an image file, and it's a very high quality image file. And what we're going to do, so I'm going to deselect depth, and I'm actually going to go 8-bit. The reason for that is Photoshop, the settings that I'm going to use doesn't work. I would have to down convert to 8-bit to make this work, and so rather than have to do that later, let me just save myself the headache. And I'm going to go ahead and export. And it's relatively quick since it's only 3 seconds, but obviously this is why I'm just using a small sample, because the longer your video, the longer this is going to take. And this part actually isn't so bad. What becomes problematic, not problematic, but just, you know, adds length to it is when you're, you know, the Photoshop aspect of it, right? So here we are. I've exported out my image sequence. So each frame of this video has been exported. They're about 35 megabytes, right? And you can like literally go by, and there's 81 frames of this. So you can only imagine what this would be for an entire movie, right? And what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this and make 2 copies. The reason for this is because I always want to retain my original one. We're going to be adding, you know, we're going to be adding these settings from Photoshop to it, and it's going to basically bake them in. And, you know, if there's an error along the way, I want to retain my original sequence and not lose that, right? So that's why we're going to keep the first one and make copies. Now, the reason we're making 2 copies is the animation that I like, it uses 2 different settings that is then blended in After Effects. So I do one that's like an oil painting, so I'm going to call, you know, Test01 oil, and then one that's more cartoony that I'm going to call cartoon. Okay, so those are the ones we're going to use. And now I go into Photoshop. I had that open before. So what I need to do within Photoshop is actually create the settings for this. So I'm just going to copy one frame to be able to utilize for creating these, and you'll see why in a moment. But so here we are in Photoshop. I have my one frame, and what we want to do is we want to record the action. So within Photoshop, you have a window called Actions, and here are the default actions. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new action for Photoshop so it knows to essentially run this. So that way we can tell the computer, hey, basically this batch of 81 images that we have for this little 3-second-ish video, you're going to apply these settings for all of them, right? So that way we don't have to lift a finger, but we need to tell the computer what to do. So we're going to create an action, and the way we do that is we're going to go ahead and, you know, create new, and we'll call this cartoon, okay, to begin with. And so now you're recording, right? So I can stop it and continue it and so forth if I need to, but this essentially records the actions that you take and remembers them, so it'll run against this. So I've included within this for you, I've included the settings. So in the comments section, there's a link to these, but you know, here I'll just kind of run you through it. So what we're going to do, and I'm only going to do this for one of them, but essentially the same would apply for the oil painting version. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate, you know, what's there. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer. Yes. Next step, make the copy a smart object. Okay, so we're gonna go here, convert to smart object. Bam. Okay, we've got that. Then we're gonna add filter poster edges. And this is why we made everything 8-bit, because if we exported higher than that, we wouldn't be able to do this. Okay, so 004, and you'll understand what that means in a moment. So we're gonna go to filter, filter gallery, and here, there's gonna be something called poster edges, okay? So we've selected that, right? So we've got poster edges, and we're gonna type in 004, okay? And we're gonna go ahead and click OK. So now you can kind of see like that there's outlines on this. You can start to kind of see it take shape. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add unsharpened mask and 9510. You'll see what that means in a moment. But we're going to go to here. You can also search for these. Unsharpen mask, right? So we go here. And so again, my settings 90, 5, and 10. So amount 90%, radius 5, and threshold 10. And we're going to click OK. So a subtle difference, but there. Okay. So then we're going to go to stylize oil paint, and then 1, 7, 0.1, and 0. So we're going to go to filter. I forget what. It's just sometimes easy to stylize oil paint. Boom. Okay. So here we go. So we're going to make the stylization 1, the cleanness 7, the scale 0.1, and the bristle detail 0. And the angle, I always just default to whatever. If that's the default, so I'm just going to keep it that way. And click OK. Boom. So now we've added that. All right. Once again, we will unsharpen, but we use different settings. So unsharpen mask, and it's 65.5. So 65 and 5. Okay. Let me create that. Cool. So make a new copy of Smart Object and move to top. Oops. Okay. So duplicate. Cool. Actually, sorry. What we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this one, convert it to a smart object, and move it. Oh, come on. What the hell did I do? What the hell is that? Okay, so there we go. So we're gonna move that there. By the way, so I've made a few, errors, more clicks. Overall, with this, as you're doing it, the more actions there are, the longer the process takes. So you want to eventually just delete the ones that are, useless in that way. And so, I'll go back in and do that later because again, like when you're doing this over an entire feature, any small action of these just adds up, right? And you don't want that. So anyway, okay. So we moved it to the top. We're going to add poster edges. So we're going to go into filter gallery, poster edges, and we're going to use, 016. 016. Click OK. Boom. Okay. Cool. We're going to add oil paint. And we're going to use 1701. Okay, so the same settings as before. Cool. And make an overlay and opacity at 40%. Okay, so what that means is here on the blending mode, we're going to select overlay, and the opacity we're going to make 40%. Boom. Okay. So you can kind of already see, you know, it's a little bit more vibrant in terms of its color than it was originally. You know, like here was the original picture. Here, you know, kind of everything's a little bit more defined. Yada, yada, yada. Okay. So merge to top layer. So Shift Alt Windows E. Shift Alt Windows E. So for me, it's actually the reason why I have. The reason why I have Windows E is because I actually have, instead of the Apple button, I use a PC keyboard, even though I'm using a Mac. So the Windows E is actually Command E, but it's merged to top layer is the command. Okay, and it's created this layer. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna add a high pass filter 5. Okay, so we're gonna go here, high pass, and we're gonna make the radius 5. Click OK. Whoa, that looks funky, right? Don't worry. We're gonna desaturate that. So let's go ahead and desaturate. Cool. Blend mode to overlay. Okay, so same thing. We're gonna click here. We're gonna overlay this. Cool. Next, add adjustment level layer. So we're gonna, every time I click deselect, okay. Adjustment, so new adjustment layer. The funny part is I basically utilize this stuff when I need to, right? So there's a lot of time in between that I don't utilize this stuff. But basically the point of this that I'm trying to do is to make it brighter, is what I'm going for essentially. Okay, so we adjusted that. So then we've got everything, and what we're gonna do is we're just gonna click save and go ahead. Actually, we're gonna discard layers and save. That way it's just easier, okay? And boom. So now we've got the entire action saved. So I'm gonna hit stop here, and now we've got, anytime we run this, it'll, you know, do all of this. Okay, so one of the things I did was I cleaned up my action so that way I got rid of the part where I opened up the smart object and then closed it, because that just created a whole set of actions that were gonna mess up the entire process. So now I've cleaned it up so that way it runs a lot smoother. And for you, what I would also recommend is just, you know, create the actions and then just do a like 3-frame test of what I'm about to show you, so that way you go through the process and you know that it works and there's no hiccups in the actions that you created. But either way, whether it's for the test or what, you know, doing it for the full thing, what we're gonna go do is in Photoshop, we're gonna go to File, Automate, and click Batch, okay? And so here we are, and what we're gonna do is for the source, we're gonna choose our cartoon folder that we have ready. And in case it's not already set, we're gonna select the action of cartoon in this case. And for the destination, we're gonna put save and close. We'll be saving this. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and do that and click OK. And then bam, it's just literally gonna do its thing and just go through frame by frame. So we can kind of track it here. So we're on the first frame here. Or actually, technically, So it starts on frame 0. So, 0 is the first frame, 1 is the second, 2 is the third. So now we're on the fourth. And that's how you can kind of track it here. And as you can see, we're watching it in real time. It's relatively fast for all intents and purposes. The only thing is, if you're doing this for a whole 90-minute movie, you might want to dedicate like a day to this, at least, right? And as I said, this is like phase 1 of 2, because we would do the oil paint settings as well. And that's a whole separate batch that you would do, right? So I'm just going to let this run and then return to it and you once it is complete. Just popping in real quick, and as you can see, we're about halfway done. But yeah, you can see why it's very beneficial to batch this instead of doing it manually. And also, this is why I chose just a 3-second or so sample, because as you can see, it takes time. It takes time. Okay, there. It is complete, and our animations, our cartoon animation exports are done, right? So here's each still frame. And what I'm going to do is do this for every single one for the oil painting. All right, and we're back. So the computer has batched everything, the cartoon effect, the oil paint effect, and now we're ready to take them and blend them within After Effects. So I'm going to go ahead and open up After Effects. And while that's opening up, I just want to kind of, show you the results real quick. So here's just a frame of the cartoon effect. So we see that. And then here's our oil effect. So you can see that, right? And as I said, we're going to blend these together. So After Effects is opening up. Here we go. It's just taking its time. All right. So here we go. Okay. So we're going to create a new project. And what we're going to do is we're going to import these sequences, right? So we're going to go ahead and click here, and we're going to select this one, right? So we're just going to select the first frame, and it already gives you an option of TIFF sequence, right? So we're going to go ahead and select that. And so what it's going to do is it's going to recognize that it's actually a video, right? It's just a series of images. So we're going to click open, and there it is, right? So now here is all of it. Wait. There we go. It's reading it. It's just getting used to it, right? So now we can see what it looks like in action. Obviously, right now it's playing like 2 frames per second, so it's not playing in real time, so it looks really slow-mo, but that's, the point. So just for my own benefit, I'm actually going to rename this Test Cartoon. Okay, so I know this one's the cartoon one. And I'm going to do the same thing for the oil painting one, right? So first, select the first frame, TIFF sequence, boom, there it is. I'm going to rename it to Test Oil. Okay, so I've created the composition, and what I'm going to do is drag these in here, and I like to have, for my purposes, I like to have the oil effect on top. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go into mode, and we're going to select screen. Okay. Now you can see that it kind of brightened up everything else. And you can test different settings, by the way. You can do it as an overlay. You can do it as an ad, however you want. And the nice, or like multiply, as I said, screen works for me. And ultimately too, even the Photoshop settings, like the fun part is you can really play with those and create get it to where you like it. You can really experiment and then create the action. So it always does it in that way. But here we are. So we have, everything, and it's not, this is much more of a subtle version of it, right? It's not kind of as animated. So it's it has a little bit of lifelike to it. You can push it more ultimately, but then when you're ready, I'm just going to go ahead and render this out, right? So add to render queue. And what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to actually export it out as a QuickTime. I don't need the alpha channels on this one, although you could. My format is going to be animation. And then I'm going to save it for me into my VFX folder. And I'll just call this animation 01. All right. And I'll go ahead and click render. So now it'll go through the entire thing and render it out. Also, too, you can lower the opacity. Like here, with the two blending modes, you can, play with it a little bit, right? So I didn't lower the opacity. Perhaps I should have, because, it creates a slightly more overblown look. But I can adjust that also with color correction a little bit later. Although here's a better opportunity to do that versus later. But yeah, see how it's got it looks. What I like about this sort of effect of it with these settings in particular is that it's kind of nuanced, where you're looking at it wait, is it animation? Is it not? It kind of has that off-putting effect. And for me, that was kind of a desired effect in it, right? So once I'm done, for me, I call these VFX shots. So when I'm ready, I import it into my VFX bin. So now that I've imported it, here is the animation of it. And yeah, you can, and the whole reason why I'm bringing it back here, because I would assume that you have, music, dialogue, whatever it is, right? And so you just go ahead and place that in on top, and you have your animation. So I hope this has been beneficial. As I said, you really have a lot of leeway in terms of the settings that you use within Photoshop. You are not required to use mine. Those were just the settings that I had selected of what worked for me for the project that I was creating, right? But you can make it more lifelike, less lifelike, more cartoony, more oil paint based. You can really get creative with it. So it's up to you. You just have to, create the actions and then let it run after that. So, what I'm providing is just the principles for this, but have at it. Let your imagination run wild with this technique, and hopefully it serves you well. If you have any further questions about any steps in the process, please comment down below. I would love to help you out, because apparently this is a widely requested thing that I have done. And so people want to know, and I want to make sure I'm as clear about this as possible. So thank you so much. I truly do appreciate you. Thank you for joining me for this tutorial. If you would like to support things that I do have a Patreon that is available to you, patreon.com/PhilSvitek, where we can have more direct interaction. There's just literally one tier. It's $10 a month. There's monthly Q&As, behind the scenes stuff. So lots to offer there. And also, I have, my book is out, my feature film, my fiction book as well. So all of that is linked to down below. That's another way to support me, and also just, enjoy some fun entertainment. So thank you so much. I appreciate you, and hope to see you next time.